So to put it very simply, people will say every event has a cause, and what caused this event itself had a cause. And so you have a chain of causes going back, and therefore there must be a cause at the very beginning of the chain, and that's what we call God. Every event has a cause. This is called the cosmological argument. It starts with a premise that's based on observation, a familiar observation about how one thing causes another. It picks up its impetus from our desire for complete explanations of what we experience, and it moves to the conclusion that what we observe in the world, where there are causal relationships, must have added to the world God himself as the first cause. Well, let's see how bad this argument is. If somebody says every event or every object has a cause, then you have to draw the conclusion that God himself has an origin, has a cause, don't you? If your premise is that every event or every object, everyone has one, well, God is an event or an object, therefore God would have a cause. But now that isn't what Christians want to prove, right? So they don't want to say every event has a cause. They want to say what? Every created event has a cause. Now, what unbeliever is going to accept that? Because if you say every created event has a cause, you've already assumed there's a creation and a creator. Well, that's the very thing you're supposed to be proving. Let's ask ourselves secondly about this. Even with respect to the created order, do we know from observation that every event has a cause? Do we know that? Now, in a sense, I do know that. Of course, I know that because the person who knows everything told me. But that's not supposed to be smuggled in at this point, right? And so let's just ask, do we even know that the opening premise is true, even after it's been refined? Is it the case that every event in this world has a cause? You don't know that. You know why? Because you haven't experienced every event in this world. No one has. And even if you gathered all of your experiences and the experiences of every human being that ever wrote down anything, we still wouldn't cover every event that ever took place. We don't know that that's the case. Or if we do know it, we know it on the basis of divine revelation. So here's a second defect in the cosmological argument. Thirdly, it doesn't make sense to say an infinite regressive entities must be ruled out. People will sometimes say, you can't have an infinite regress, you have to rule that out, because then the universe could never have gotten started. You know, if I were an intelligent unbeliever, I'd say, precisely. Who is granting that the universe got started? It's always been here. And so when someone says you can't have an infinite regress because then the universe wouldn't start, the answer is, I don't want the universe to have a start. And so I'm not worried about it being an infinite regress. That's no problem in my system of thought. Moreover, this is a conspicuous error in logic when Christians reason there is a cause for each event. They reason there is a cause for each event, and from that conclude there is a cause for all events. And I know I'm going fast here, but let me put this on the board. If the premise says that there is a cause for each event, that's looking at events distributively. You understand what I'm getting at? It looks at every particular event, one by one by one, and says about each one of them, it has a cause, it has a cause, it has a cause. But the conclusion that Christians try to draw from this is that there is a cause, and to make this clear, I'll write one underneath here, that there's one cause, a cause, for all events taken together. And all I can do, because time is short, is tell you that that is a grievous mistake in quantification and logic. It does not follow, even if there is a cause, and we don't know that there is, but even if there is a cause for each event, that doesn't prove that there's one cause for all the events taken together. The cosmological argument proves not one cause, but what? A number of first causes. for all we know. Fifthly, it's logically fallacious to argue from the property of the parts to the property or a property of the whole. That is, any of you who've taken logic again know this, it's an informal fallacy to say that because the parts of something have this quality, therefore the whole of which they are the part has that quality as well. Now, by the parts, I mean parts of our experience. Every part of our experience shows us causation, let's say. The parts are characterized by causal relations. Every piece of my experience has something that caused it. But you see, that doesn't prove that the whole, of which these are the parts, itself shares that same causal relationship. I'm being much too philosophical for you, right? Too abstract. Let me give you an example. Let's say that my children got a set of Legos for Christmas. Now, let's say they got 100 sets of Legos for Christmas. Now, you all know what Legos are, right? I don't have to explain this to you, do I? Oh, okay. And so here's, Daddy putting all the Legos together. And I put all the Legos together. Hundreds of boxes of Legos, putting them all together. When I get done, I have this grand edifice. A Statue of Liberty made out of Legos. My neighbors come over. We begin to charge money for people to look at this thing. It's wonderful. Now then, here's my argument. Every part of that Lego Statue of Liberty weighs less than an ounce. Therefore, the Statue of Liberty weighs less than an ounce. You don't say, no, Dr. Bahnsen. The quality of the parts is not necessarily the quality of the whole. The characteristic of the part, each Lego being less than an ounce in weight, doesn't prove that the Statue of Liberty is made up of all those parts. They're all less than an ounce, but that doesn't prove that the whole statue is less than an ounce. And so in logic, you can't argue from the parts to the whole necessarily. And yet the argument from causation says everything that's part of my experience has a cause, therefore the whole of this world in which we live must have a cause as well. That is just logically fallacious. And then finally, even if all events in nature have a first cause, and that's something that I've disputed already, but even if it were true, we have no basis to infer from our natural experience of causation that there is a non-natural cause for the world as a whole. You see, because my argument is based on evidence taken from my experience of the natural world. But my conclusion has nothing to do with my experience of the natural world. My conclusion has something to do with a supernatural entity. And so, as many philosophers, especially Immanuel Kant, have pointed out, all of these arguments from natural experience are fallacious because they make the huge leap to a conclusion that has nothing to do with nature, but has everything to do with something supernatural. And so the argument for God as a first cause in 6 different ways that I've had to run through more quickly than I'd like, in 6 different ways we see, is just a terrible argument, philosophically speaking.